So why don't I bring the shoe up here? So did you know that during the Vietnam War, back in the late 1960s, I found this out when I was actually in Vietnam, there was a certain group of people called the Cu Chi villagers that were fighting against the Americans in southern Vietnam, and they were guerrilla warfare people, and they literally just lived in their little villages. And when the Americans were trying to come in and basically run them out, they had to combat the Americans quite a bit. And one of the very interesting little techniques that they used with their guerrilla warfare tactics was they would actually take their shoes and they would strap them onto their feet backwards, and that way when they would walk, their tracks would lead the other way. And a lot of times what would happen then is the Americans would be going this way, and the Cu Chi would go behind them and flank them. This is clever, huh? Yeah. So, a second knowledge bomb. Oh, almost made it. A second knowledge bomb that's a little bit more related to permaculture. Did you know that at the end of World War II, at that point in time, because of all of our effort and investment going into the war, we had basically told our people in America, hey, we can't spend as much of our money and our energy into producing food. So please, for the sake of our country, produce as much food as you can in your own backyard. So by the time the war was over 50% of our food was coming from our own backyard. They called it the victory gardens, and that's how we were feeding ourselves. Even now, at times Russia produces most of their food on 2% of their land. So, because a lot of people there still do a lot of backyard gardening. So, with that being said, what are we talking about today? So today I want to kind of go a little bit more in depth with the process of fermentation and how it relates to our ability to make biofertilizers. So to go ahead and start, what is fermentation? Okay, so are you ready? Okay, so fermentation is the process of chemical reactions that takes place when microorganisms are converting sugars into ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and organic acids within an environment that's low in oxygen. Did you get all that?
No.
So basically, to keep that even more condensed and even simpler, the idea is that any type of organic matter, when it's about to decompose, if it's in an environment that's very low in oxygen, what you're going to get is that that organic matter is going to be inoculated by certain microorganisms that are going to start eating that organic matter up, and they're going to start pissing and shitting out ethyl alcohol, organic acids, and CO2. So that's essentially what fermentation is. And fermentation is one of those things we've been doing for the majority of our human history. We've done it for thousands and thousands of years. Originally, we used it as a method of preserving food. So the reason for that is that when you take certain foods and you put them in that controlled environment that lacks oxygen, the types of microorganisms that you get, in particular things like lactobacillus, they secrete organic acids. So what happens is that it acidifies that food, and that repels pathogens. They don't like very acidic environments. So that's ultimately how we started using it as a method of biopreservation for our food. So as far as how that relates to biofertilizers and how we can actually make natural biofertilizers through the process of fermentation, ultimately what we found through science is that there are three main categories of what we call effective microorganisms. So those are the ones that we actually want, that we can use for biofertilizers, fermenting food, that kind of stuff. So those three main classes are photosynthetic bacteria, they are lactic acid producing bacteria, and there's yeast. Yeast is single-celled fungus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take you through a couple different examples of photosynthetic, of lactic acid producing. I'm going to show you how we can make a very natural herbal hormone that we can use to grow plants and also to feed ourselves. And then I'm also, without having my actual bin for the demonstration, I'm going to show you how to make homemade wine and a fish fertilizer, which is hugely useful for naturally fertilizing your plants. So to go ahead and start, I want to go over this guy. So this is actually a type of EM. It's a photosynthetic bacteria that we got from a very good friend of ours. He's a huge inspiration for me. He's been doing permaculture for like 7 or so years here in Thailand. Very, very knowledgeable. He brought us this mother culture, and mother culture is being like the original sample of it that we can actually just give food to and grow more of. And he brought us this, and we've been propagating it ever since. So as far as the couple of cool things about this one, the interesting thing about this one is that this photosynthetic bacteria, you will find no literature on it in English as far as any type of research, anything about it. You literally can't look it up. Trust me, I've tried. There's nothing on it. The reason for that is that this was originally cultivated in Japan. So they essentially cracked the natural code. They figured out how to get a mother culture. It essentially grows on in like still water on the pond's edge where there might be some anaerobic decomposition going on. And basically they were able to crack the code of nature. They cultivated this mother culture, and then they found out what to feed it. So the interesting thing about this is that this one in particular, most effective microorganisms, they want to eat sugar, right? So they convert sugars. This one does not want sugar. It wants sunlight, photosynthetic, and it also wants hydrogen sulfide. So who knows what hydrogen sulfide is? Let me give you a hint. You know that awful rotten egg smell that you get sometimes? That's hydrogen sulfide. It can kill people. It's a noxious compound that is, basically it occurs when you get anaerobic decomposition. And the interesting thing about what they found out about this one, the way they found out to cultivate it, was that it doesn't want sugars, it wants sunlight, and it wants hydrogen sulfide. So what they found out they could do is they could take a bottle, they could fill it up about this much with the mother culture, and then they could put in a tablespoon of egg yolk, and then they'd fill it up with mineral water, they'd set it out in the sun. That would cause the process of fermentation to start. And over time, what you would start with, which was like a very light pink culture as it first started, over the course of 2 to 4 weeks, will turn into a very deep red culture. That's when you know it's done. And the cool thing about this, as far as its effectiveness, so does anybody know how long it would take land to naturally cure itself if you were spraying all kinds of chemicals and pesticides on it, if it had become really degraded, lifeless land? Any idea? So depending on the types of soils, anywhere from 100 to 400 years. So let's pretend then that we actually took something like this type of photosynthetic bacteria, and we started spraying that on that same field. Any idea how long that would take to cure that land, to make it clean again? 3 years. Part of that is because this will eat hydrogen sulfide, which hydrogen sulfide is what's happening when you have an anaerobic environment. As it's eating that hydrogen sulfide, ultimately what you get is the environment starts becoming less anaerobic and more aerobic. The more aerobic it is, the more oxygen it has, the more conducive it is to actually growing microbial populations and actually being able to support life. So this was very, very useful at cleansing land. Another thing they tried was that they actually took this and they did science experiments where they tried to grow one without it and one with it, and they found that the root systems on the ones that were grown with this were twice as big. This is very, very effective at helping plants grow, in part because it cleanses the land and the plant itself when it's actually helping it photosynthesize. So it's very, very effective in helping plants grow. This is also mostly protein, so it's very good as far as just helping plants grow big and strong. It helps supplement them with nitrogen, all kinds of stuff. So this photosynthetic bacteria is very, very useful. The cool thing about it, like I said though, is that once you have the mother culture, all you need is a little bit. You can just keep feeding it, and we started with 1 liter of it, and we've been using it all summer long, and now we've got like 2 big bins like this size. And so we can continue to use it even more and more, and I promise you it is helping our plants grow. I can see it myself. So that is the photosynthetic bacteria. Again, just one of the 3 main categories. The second one, which relates to a homemade probiotic that I can kind of tell you a little bit about, is lactic acid producing bacteria. So the most common one of that is lactobacillus. Anybody know what that one is? It's what we find in yogurt. So that's basically how milk becomes yogurt. You have milk that has lactate, which is milk sugar. The lactobacillus go in there. They convert that sugar into organic acids, lactic acid, and what you end up getting is yogurt. And that's why yogurt kind of has like that acidic taste to it. So before I say anything about lactic acid producing bacteria and how you can make a homemade probiotic and why that's useful, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about how that relates to the idea of fermented food in general. So the interesting thing is that for the majority of our human history, we actually ate food that was alive. Now, for the most part, we eat food that's dead. Food that has been pasteurized, food that has been sterilized, and it's dead food. And the interesting thing about that is science has repeatedly shown that a food that is alive, fermented food, is better for you and more nutritious than food that is dead. So what I mean by that is that, to put it this way, up to 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So everything that goes on in your body, as far as your body's ability to absorb nutrients, your body's ability to fight disease, so much of that has to do with what's going on in your gut. So what happens then, if let's say I eat a little bit of yogurt, live cultured yogurt, or I take a little spoonful of this homemade probiotic and I drink a little bit of that before I actually eat. What I've done is I have basically primed my digestive tract to better absorb the nutrients within my food. The nutritional value of your food is only as good as your body's ability to absorb that nutrients. Does that make sense? So here's an interesting tidbit that a lot of people think that I really wanted to believe. I did all the research I could to really try to figure this one out. So if anybody thinks that just eating raw vegetables, you're going to be like the healthiest person ever, I'm sorry. That's not actually quite true, and here's why. So plants have a cell wall that has cellulose, right? In order to break down that cellulose, you need a certain enzyme called cellulase. We do not have that enzyme. So what that means is that when we digest those vegetables and whatnot, we do not fully digest that food. That's why it's high in fiber. It helps clean our systems out because it's really bulky. The problem is that you might get the sugars and the starches from that food, but for the most part, you don't get the actual proteins and the lipids that are inside of the cell wall. And so the point that I'm saying that for is that when you ferment your food, you allow the little microorganisms that you help put into your body to help with that process. So they will actually help with the nutritional availability of the food you eat, including things like raw vegetables. So as far as how you could make something like this, something that is very helpful for your health, for the nutritional quality of your food, and something that honestly is just going to make you feel better, and I can attest to that as someone that does it, is for something like this. So this one is actually very, very easy to make. It's a lactic acid producing bacteria. The 3 ingredients that I needed, all I needed for this was organic brown rice. I put about, so pretend I did it in a big bottle like this. This is about like 6 liters, I think. So I took a 6-liter jug here, and in that 6 liters, I took out a little bit of the mineral water. So I had about 5 to 5.5 liters of mineral water, and I put in 4 cups of organic brown rice. I did 180 grams of organic brown sugar, and I did 30 grams of organic pink Himalayan sea salt. Now, why organic? Making probiotics is just like making a drink. It is only as good as your weakest ingredient. So you want as clean as ingredients as you can get, if you can get them. They're going to be a little bit more expensive, but it will create a better culture for you. So I take those ingredients in the right ratios. I then take that mixture, and so don't ask me why, but this is just from everything I've researched on it, this is how they do it. So they always say that instead of taking that mixture that you put all in that bottle together, do not just sit there and shake it really hard. What you want to do is on that organic brown rice, there's all kinds of lactobacillus, that lactic acid producing bacteria. What you want to do is essentially gently rub them off that rice and into the liquid culture. The way they say to do that is to shake it like this. 1, 2, 3. You're supposed to do this 88 times. Do not ask me why they said 88. I have no idea. But they say if you do that 88 times, what you're going to get is that obviously through mixing it, it'll help homogenize the materials, and that'll get the entire process of fermentation started. Now, when you're making that lactic acid producing bacteria and that homemade probiotic, a couple things you need to keep in mind. Okay, first and foremost, you need to be checking that container at least 4 times a day. Why do I say that? Because again, all of the bacteria in there, they are eating those sugars, all the salts and sugars, those minerals, they're eating those, and when they're eating those, they're farting them out as carbon dioxide. So what that's going to mean is that that container is going to get pressurized. It's going to build pressure. And if you do not off-gas it periodically, it can actually explode on you. I've had that happen to me. That's how you learn. You learn by doing, learn through failing. It's not a failure, it's a lesson, right? So the idea then is that when you first mix it 88 times, there's going to be a lot going on in there. When you first mix it, it'll probably go up near the top of your container. I would then take the cap off. I would squeeze the air out of it until the liquid was all the way to the top. Any rice that's floating there, I would take that out. I would then seal it. And the reason I do that is because lactobacillus like anaerobic environments. So I take all the air out of it, I seal it, and then over the next couple hours, it's going to start pressurizing, and it's going to start basically kind of filling back out. And when you see it doing that, it means that you need to off-gas that. Let that CO2 out so that it doesn't pressurize so much that it explodes on you. So again, you basically take the air out, you seal it, and then you come and check it every 4 hours. After you off-gas it from there, you basically want to do that same shaking motion about like 10 or 12 times, and then do the same thing. Take the air out of it, seal it, and then do it again. Come back in 4 hours. After about 7 to 10 days, it's going to be pretty much finished. The way you tell that it's finished is a couple things. One, it will stop pressurizing so much, which that tells you that they've pretty much done their thing. Now they're just kind of suspended in the liquid culture, and it's pretty much done. The second thing, when it's finished, it should not smell bad. It should not have a foul odor. It should basically kind of have this like buttery, acidic smell to it. The reason for that, and the third way you know that it's done, if you were to check the pH, because it's acidifying, the pH is going to be around 3 to 4. And that's when you know that that's pretty well cultured. It's pretty done. So that would be how you make that. The cool thing about what you can do with this is that, first of all, like I said, I can ingest it, and it will help with the nutritional availability of my food. I can also inoculate my compost piles with it. So who saw me doing that yesterday? Anybody? Yeah, so the reason I did that is because lactobacillus in particular, because they're anaerobic, they're going to go to any area within that pile that's anaerobic, and as they're helping to churn that material up, they're actually allowing for more air to go into that compost pile, because as they're churning stuff up, they're kind of sinking, and the air is trying to follow them. So they actually help aerate the pile because they're anaerobic. So I could inoculate my compost pile with it. I could also clean my floors with it. You know why? Because if I take this and I dump it on my floor and I spread it with a mop, it's just like I was talking about yesterday. They basically outcompete any bad smelling pathogens that might be on your floors or whatever for the food that might be there. And so you can actually clean your floors with it. You can also take this, dilute it with some water, spray it on your plants, and it will help them grow. Essentially, this probiotic is very multifunctional. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. So that is the lactic acid producing bacteria. The other one that I wanted to show real quick that I want to pass around, just because it honestly smells really good. This is the same idea, so it's a process of fermentation, where I basically took all types of very nutritious organic herbs, things like ginger, turmeric, chili, morning glory, lemongrass, all that really good stuff, all that really aromatic herbs kind of stuff. I put it all in a culture together. I put it with some honey, and then I put it with a little bit of water, and then I basically allow for an environment that ferments it. So as I pass that around, feel free to open that and smell it. As you're kind of smelling that, one thing I will add about the process of fermentation in general, a very good rule of thumb as far as your ratios of sugar, water, and substrate. Substrate being your bulk organic material, whether that's fruit for making wine, whether it's the rice for making your homemade probiotic. The substrate is just the bulk organic material. A very good rule of thumb for fermenting and making things like this is 1 part sugar, 3 parts substrate, 5 parts water. If you do that, you will usually get a very good culture. And again, fermentation is best when there's a lack of oxygen. So what that means is that whatever container you're using, you don't want to have a bunch of oxygen in there. So you want to kind of keep it relatively low in oxygen, and that's how you get that fermentation process to really get going. As far as what you can do with that liquid herbal hormone, question? Yeah.
You said 1 part sugar, 3 parts substrate, 5 parts water.
Yeah, and as far as the sugar, again, that could be, try to use as clean of ingredients as you can get, but that could be honey. So that was made with jungle honey that I got out here. You could do honey, you could do organic brown sugar. I would definitely not recommend things like white sugar. That's been processed a lot. It's got a lot of chemicals in it. The more chemicals you got in it, the more toxins like that, the more conducive that environment is for actually cultivating bad bacteria. And that has also happened to me, and you don't want that. So that's the liquid herbal hormone. Again, that thing, same idea. So all those effective microorganisms, they're in there. They're eating up that material. They're breaking it down. They're converting the sugars into alkyl alcohol, organic acids, carbon dioxide. As they're doing that, they're unlocking the nutrients. So all of the nutritional value of the lemongrass, the morning glory, the turmeric, the ginger, that is all in that culture. And if I drink that, you bet your ass it's actually going to really be good for me. So there's that. And then, okay, so those are the 2 types of effective microorganisms that are bacteria. Now we'll talk about the yeast, and I'll tell you about the wine. So this is where I actually wish I had my big barrel to actually show you. Truth be told though, we already made a batch, and I really thought like, oh yeah, like we're gonna save it for the entire summer and drink it at the very end and blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, we drank it way too fast. So here's how you make homemade wine. And let me preface this by saying that when I usually show people this, and I show them the container I use, it's a fucking garbage bin that's wrapped in medical tape that I busted a hole in and put a plumbing valve in, and that's my container. So the first thing I always ask people is, what do you notice about this? Is it fancy? No, it doesn't have to be. That's one of the biggest misnomers that I ever hear about, is that people have this idea that in order for something to be really effective, it has to be really expensive. Think about it this way. How do you think indigenous people were making beer and wine way before we had all this really cool technology and all these, perfect little containers and airlocks and all that kind of stuff? Indigenous people have been doing it for centuries, and they didn't need all that. Again, you can get pure cultures and maybe some better quality wine doing that, but you can absolutely make your own homemade wine without any of that stuff. It does not have to be expensive. So the way I do it is you basically start, again, it doesn't have to be very specific. I started with a big old pot of fruit. So I used bananas and pineapples. I made banana pineapple homemade wine. It was a white wine. So I used bananas and pineapples. I skinned them, mostly because I don't know if they've been sprayed with pesticides, anything, that kind of stuff. So I skin them. I chop them up to about fist-sized pieces. The reason I do that, by the way, which is a good rule of thumb as well, as far as your substrate, if you start getting a lot smaller than fist-sized pieces, those microorganisms will eat that really, really quick, and that means it pressurizes really, really quick. So as far as, especially with things like wine, use like fist-sized pieces for your fruit, and then you take all that fruit, all that banana and pineapple, I put in a big pot. I then, first of all, sterilized my garbage bin, and then I took all that fruit and I dumped it in there. Then I took about the same ratio of water, so about a 1-to-1 ratio of fruit to water. I then took that water, I got it really hot, pretty much took it to a boil, and then I took that boiled water and I also threw that in that garbage bin. Now, for the first 24 hours, I pretty much do nothing. This first week or so that I'm about to describe is called primary fermentation, which that's where the environment is actually aerobic, which I'll explain why in a second. So that first day, I just take those two things, the hot water and fruit, I put them in the bin. I then cover that bin with some type of breathable cloth. So something like a flannel shirt is what I always use. The reason you cover it, but you also want to make sure you tie a string around it to keep it sealed, is because you want it to be able to get airflow. You want to make sure it's oxygenated, but you do not want bugs in there. If you get a single bug, it will turn into vinegar. And that, I promise you, will piss you off. So do not let bugs in it. Yeah?
So, do you put the flannel on the first day that you I didn't know if you said leave it and then like after?
Yeah, so basically what I do is, so I put those two things in there, I then cover it with my flannel, that's my breathable cloth, I then tie a string around it to make sure nothing can get in there, and for the first 24 hours, I might come visit it once or twice. Every time I visit it, I'm just kind of checking on it, and really I use that time to maybe take a stick and aerate it real quick. I'll stir it real quick just to make sure there's good oxygen in there, and then after that 24 hours, I've come and checked on it, I've maybe stirred it like 2 or 3 times. At that point is when you actually add your yeast. So the only things you really need here are fruit, water, and yeast. That's it. As far as yeast, if you want to be, really indigenous, I guess, you could set a bowl of fruit outside and it'll naturally be inoculated by yeast eventually. That's how they do it in prison a lot. They make prison hooch. They take fruit from the cafeteria and they'll put it with a cloth and then they'll put it in garbage bags and seal it to make it anaerobic. Yeah, a little tidbit. I had some friends that made some very poor decisions growing up. So, but anyway, the way you do this one is I would recommend just buying a packet of yeast. They're very cheap. It's very simple. You just buy that packet of yeast, and then after that 24 hours has passed with just the fruit and the water, you take that yeast, you take out just a cupful of that fruit water. The hot fruit water basically just allows the fruit a chance to kind of steep into the water and break it up a little bit. You take that fruit water, you then pour the yeast in, you wait about a minute, you'll see it bubble a little bit, that's how you know it's active. You then take that yeast water and you throw it back in there. After that, same thing. I put my breathable cloth back on it, I tie it, and then I leave it like that. And again, for that first 5 or so days, the only thing I have to do is make sure bugs don't get in it. It's got oxygen, so I'll come and basically stir it every 4 to 5 hours, something like that, 3 to 4 times a day. I'll stir it, and that's it. So after that first 5 days, the only other thing I have to do while it's in primary fermentation is at that point, it's highly recommended that you take about, say, 5 kilos of sugar and you mix it with 5 kilos of water, or you don't even need that much really. Just take a pot, boil some water, and throw some sugar in there. And from that, you basically just make a little sugar syrup, wait until it's consistent, and then once you have that sugar water, that sugar syrup, make sure you give that time to cool down. You do not want to pour boiling hot sugar water into that bin because that's going to kill all the yeast in there. But you basically just let that cool down, and then you take your cold to cool sugar water, you throw it in that bin, and once again, you just take the breathable cloth, you wrap it back on there, you seal it, and then you wait about another 3 to 5 days. So the first stage, primary fermentation, takes about 10 days total. The only difference is that you're basically aerating it 2 to 3 times a day, keeping it covered, making sure bugs don't get in it. About 5 days in, you add the sugar water, and that's it. That's all primary fermentation is. The only thing that changes is that after that 10 days, you're going to take it into secondary fermentation. The reason it's in primary fermentation is because that oxygen is what enables that yeast to propagate really, really well. So over the course of that first week, it's going to go from, say, like 100 yeast to, say, like 5,000 yeast. And that's going to mean that process is going to take a lot shorter amount of time. So once that's done, you basically, to take it into secondary fermentation, you just create an anaerobic environment. So that's when I basically take the lid, I put it on there, I wrap medical tape around it, and that just means that no oxygen can get in there. The only other thing I do is I poked a hole in it and put a little valve on it. That way, if at any point I see that bin starting to get pressurized, I can take that valve, I can off-gas it real quick, and then done. And that's all you have to do. And then from there, it's just a set and forget process. You literally don't have to do anything after that first 10 days once it's gotten anaerobic and gone into secondary fermentation. The only thing you're looking for at that point is I waited about 6 to 8 weeks. So what they say is that the longer you wait, depending on the type of yeast, the longer you wait, the more alcoholic it's going to get and the less sweet it's going to be. Obviously that's because as they're converting those sugars into ethyl alcohol, it's going from having a lot of sugar, being very sweet, to having less and less sugar, being very, very alcoholic. So I off-gassed it at about 6 weeks. I smelled it, and it smelled like straight hydrogen peroxide. So to me, that tells me, I think it's done. So at that point, I actually harvested it, and this is the best part. When I harvested that, I've literally spent this entire time, putting everything into making this wine. I bought the yeast, I cut up the fruit, I did the entire process. I nurtured it, for that 6 weeks and just kept an eye on it, made sure it was okay. And it was finally time to harvest. And I'm like, shit, I hope this works. And so I ended up taking the bin, and the only other person here was Hannah. And she never knows what I'm up to. And so I was like, Hannah, I need your help. She's like, what are you talking about? And so I took the big bin, I took it into the bathroom. Mind you, this entire time, I'm running around in my underwear. And I don't know why I told you that, but this kind of adds to the story. So I take the big bin, I go into the bathroom, and Hannah's in there, and I give her an onion bag. And that's going to filter the substrate out when I dump it. And so she's sitting there with her onion bag, and I basically have to take this huge bin and dump it over this onion bag to try to filter the big bulky shit out of it to just get the liquid wine behind it. And we did that, and you had this big pot that was full of this liquid culture that was kind of like milky. And I was like, okay, time to try the wine. This homemade banana pineapple wine. So me and Hannah, took a little bit of it. We looked at each other, we tried it, and it was fucking delicious. It was so good. It tasted like real wine. And we actually got like 13 bottles out of that one batch. And the best part? I got to take something that I made, that I was actually a producer of, and I got to share it with my friends. And that was fucking awesome. So whether it's doing homemade wine or whatever, permaculture is about being a producer rather than just a consumer. So find out whatever it is you can do in that regard, and I promise you that the quality of experience that comes with that, I can't bother trying to explain it. You have to actually experience that. So go do yourself a favor and make your friends some homemade wine. It's very, very fulfilling. So with that, do you have any questions? I'm going to show you, for anybody that's interested, if you want to know anything about the fish fertilizer or the natural insecticide, they're at the plot right now, and I'm more than happy to show you how those work. So if you have any questions about that, just ask me whenever we're at the plot. If you want to take a break, grab some water. Yeah?
Could you reiterate the homemade probiotic ingredients?
Of course, yeah. So basically you want, and thank you for mentioning that. So a couple things I actually forgot to mention real quick. The only type of EM, the only type of microorganism that likes sunlight is photosynthetic. So as far as this one, you need to make sure that you're keeping this out of the direct sunlight because it will kill the microbes. The UV rays will kill them. The other thing about this needs to be about 90 to 100 degrees. And so that's, again, the same temperature as our bodies. That's why lactobacillus are in our guts already. So what I do for this one is I keep it out of the sun. I like keep it in my room. I wrapped it in a blanket to make sure it was nice and warm, and that's how it works really well. But as far as the ingredients, you need mineral water. So the reason I say that, whenever you're making any type of EM or anything like that, if you can help it, it's best to not use tap water. The reason for that, it's got all kinds of fluoride and chlorine in it, and that can kill microbes. So you want to use mineral water, anything you can drink. So for this one, I used a jug this size, and I did about 5.5 liters of mineral water. I used 4 cups of organic brown sugar. I used 180 grams of, 4 cups of organic brown rice. 4 cups of organic brown rice, 180 grams of organic brown sugar, and then 30 grams of organic pink Himalayan sea salt. And after that, again, it's just kind of, shaking it at one time 88 times. You basically take the air out of it, pick out any bad rice, seal it. After that, check it 3 to 4 times a day. Every time you check it, make sure you off-gas it, shake it a couple times, and then again, take all the air out of it and seal it again, and that'll do that. It'll pressurize. You know it's working if it's pressurizing. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Also too, real quick, I'm all about experimenting, learn by doing, but something I've learned by doing a few different ways, you want to be careful about giving them too much food, because what they will do is they will turn that really quickly, and it'll pressurize the can really, really quickly, and it'll blow up. I had one of my EM cultures that blew up in the middle of the night. I had another one that blew up as soon as I opened it. But again, that's how you learn. You learn by doing. I had a sustainable farmer friend of mine that said, I don't know the one way to do it. I know the 199 ways to not do it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah, question.
The pink one, what was that called again?
The pink one is a photosynthetic bacteria.
And then why did you have to put an egg yolk in there?
Because the egg yolk, when you put it in the sun with the egg yolk, that egg yolk is basically starting to ferment, and it releases hydrogen sulfide, which is what they want to eat. That's why I say that hydrogen sulfide smell, that's rotten eggs. So basically the egg is in here rotting, and the photosynthetic bacteria are eating that. So do you want to smell it? It's not like, whoa, shit, but it's like not, it doesn't smell that good.
Okay.
Smell it. Yeah, so maybe don't like whip it in like that. But yeah, it doesn't smell that good. But yeah, those microbes are eating. They're doing the thing. So with that, thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions or anything like that? Yeah?
For the pink one, you said that in order to get rid of all the chemicals that goes in, it would be about 3 years. Is that putting it on top of the already chemicalized soil, or is it just new fresh soil with just that?
So not really. So basically, what's happening with this one is that part of what happens to soil when it starts degrading is that it starts, so I talked about compromising your soil food web, all that kind of stuff. What happens is that when you start losing the life in your soil, you start losing the structure in your soil. And when you lose structure and your soil becomes compacted, what ends up happening is it starts losing oxygen. So when it starts compacting, it doesn't hold much oxygen, which means that it can't support life very well. So in particular, without oxygen, you get anaerobic conditions, and that's where you get a lot of hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is produced through anaerobic decomposition. And so when you start spraying this on there, what ends up happening is that they start eating a lot of that hydrogen sulfide, and being that they're their own type of microorganism, they start kind of repopulating that area. And as they start repopulating it, others start to repopulate it. And as essentially they kind of kickstart the process of rehabilitation by being able to go into those anaerobic environments and kind of start eating that hydrogen sulfide and making it more conducive to aerobic microorganisms coming in there, which most of the beneficial ones we want are aerobic, besides lactic acid producing bacteria, lactobacillus. So yeah, it just kind of cleanses the land through that process. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, perfect timing.
I have one.
Yep, go ahead.
So you made white wine with banana and pineapple.
Yeah.
So will it kind of just be the color of the fruits you?
Essentially, yes. So it was kind of like a milky yellowish color almost, and it was kind of like a dry wine, but that shit was good. Like it was really good, and I didn't get a hangover or anything. And we had like 13 bottles of it, and we were like, oh yeah, we'll save these till the end of the year. And then we started trying, and everyone was like, shit, man, that's really good. And so we just started like popping bottles, you know, and then it was gone before we fucking knew it.
So even though it smelled like hydrogen peroxide, you don't.
No, so essentially when we bottled it, and I think it was really too just because it had been, you know, in that sealed container. When I finally off-gassed it, it's like that whiff of hydrogen peroxide.
So it went away a little.
Yeah, so it wasn't super alcoholic, but you could definitely taste that there was alcohol in there, and you could feel it too. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool, gang. All right. Well, thank you very much.